Hello and welcome to Dice and Demons. I'm Emma and today we are going to be taking a look at how I paint my death drag that I'm calling Whoopsie-Deffie. And when you see the model all done with the base and everything, you'll probably understand why. So I start out with a model that's just been primed. It's primed with the Wraithbone spray. The red paint I'm using here is the contrast paint Blood Angels Red, and I prefer this over the darker one, Flesh Terror Red, just because this is, I think this is a nice base color for using my cross-hatching pattern later on. This is sort of a solid red. The next thing I do is I grab my yellow contrast paint, it's called Yandom Yellow, and I give some of the parts of the arm here of the Death Dread some yellow. I don't have a plan in mind when I start out with something like this. I know what colors I want to use and I have a very vague idea of what it's actually going to look like once it's all done. But I don't know exactly where I want the yellow parts and the red parts and the blue parts. I just sort of make it up as I go along. Usually I find that it works well, but sometimes it turns out not to go exactly as I imagined it would. The blue color I'm using is the contrast paint called Athematic Blue, and this is my favorite out of all the contrast paints, so I think I might find an excuse to fit it into almost any sort of color scheme I would come up with. When I put down the base layer of paint, I try to be relatively neat. I don't want to spend hours doing just the base color, but on the other hand, if I get too messy with it, then I have to spend a lot of time redoing the Wraithbone step because it won't work. I can't put a contrast paint over another contrast paint. It won't cover it. I will usually go back with the Wraithbone if I think it's very visible that I made a mistake, but if I think it's going to work out okay, or if it's in a shaded area where you won't really easily see it, then I'll probably cheat and pretend I never made a mistake. Here I start doing the edge highlight for the yellow, and I use the contrast paint Gryph-hound Orange for this step. I really like the Gryph-hound Orange for this. I think it gives the yellow a nice deep saturated color, which I really like. For the darker highlights for the blue, I use Pterodon Turquoise, another color that I really enjoy. This one I actually also like a lot on its own. I will be doing a video at some point showing how I paint my Ossiarch Bone Reapers, where I use the Pterodon Turquoise on its own and then with a very bright neon green highlight. I think it looks really nice. For the edge highlights for the red, I use Gore-Grunter Fur, which is a darker brown. The red is not quite as bright as the yellow and the blue, and I think it gives a nice sort of balance to the model. You'll notice when you watch these videos that I don't use a painting handle. It's not that I don't think it's a good idea to use a painting handle, because it definitely is. I just can't come to terms with it. I find it makes the whole painting process much less intuitive and much less enjoyable. So I'm not doing it, but if you can come to terms with it, I definitely think you should. The silver metal bits are done with the Iron Hand steel. I have considered doing them in a sort of a non-metallic metal, but I actually like that they stand out from the rest of the model. You can also see that I start to do some of the darker edge highlights here before I have even gotten all the base colors done. And that's because, as I said earlier, I don't really have a plan when I'm painting, so I sometimes go back a step and repeat a step, and it's definitely not the most efficient way to paint, but I find that if I have to do a lot of planning ahead, then it takes away a lot of the enjoyment I have with painting, and this is after all my hobby. So if it works for you to have a complete idea of exactly how you want to paint before you even get started on the model, then I think that sounds like an excellent idea and probably makes the whole process easier and perhaps even gives you a better result in the end. The cover parts are painted with a Citadel color called Fulgurite Cover. I'm not quite convinced by this color yet, actually. I think it looks a little bit too much like gold. On the other hand, I want something that stands out from the silver, so I think this works just fine. It's just a personal preference. So next up I go to the trusty Nuln oil and do all the silver bits to give them a bit of a shade. I love this part of the painting process. Nuln oil is almost liquid magic. It looks great and it takes no time. Then I move on to doing the lighter edge highlights. I'm just using a yellow color here to get the edge highlights on the Yandon yellow. And I honestly think that if you wanted to skip a step, this would be it. Because I'm going to do another edge highlight on the yellow with a wraithbone, which is what really defines the yellow parts. So I think you could skip doing this step if you didn't want to spend as much time doing this. I obviously don't think the results will be quite as good, otherwise I wouldn't do it. But I definitely think you could try it out and see what the results would be. On the other hand, if you don't want to spend a lot of time painting your models, you should probably go with another painting technique, because this is, to be honest, quite time consuming. It's not difficult to do, it's just a lot of thin lines, but it takes patience. So if you're thinking that spending more than 5 or 10 hours on a Deff Dread is too much, then this is not a painting style for you. The lighter edge highlight I do on the red color is done with a paint called Lava Orange from the Army Painter. This again is another step that you could quite possibly skip if you wanted to, because I'm going to do another lighter edge highlight with pure yellow afterwards. But again, I think it gives a nice depth to the colors, so I'm willing to spend the extra time doing this. By this point I've already realized that I'm probably going to be spending the better part of 50 or 60 hours doing this model, so I might as well do it exactly the way I think it should be done. The copper parts are then shaded with an old Citadel chestnut ink. It's my favorite for shading any sort of gold or copper colors. I'll be eternally grateful if you have a suggestion of what I'm going to do once I run out of my beloved chestnut ink. Now I'm highlighting the yellow with the wraithbone. This is one of my favorite parts of painting like this, highlighting with the wraithbone and then here on the blue parts with the white, because now it all comes together, I think. This is one of the parts where I try to be a little bit more careful, so I don't have to go back with the contrast paints and redo it. The red is then highlighted with yellow, and as you can see, the end result is not as bright as it is with the yellow and the turquoise, but I think it works pretty well. Next up, I take my Stormhost silver and use that for highlighting the metal bits on the model, both the fulgurite copper and the iron hand steel. Then I take some blood for the blood guard and apply that to the source at the end of the Deff Dread's arm. Then I use my old toothbrush that I've only ever used for stuff like this and apply some splashes of blood so it looks like he's been cutting into someone with the source on his arm. That's all of the painting process I'm going to be showing you in this video, because it's already more than 10 minutes long. And the rest of the Deff Dread was painted using the exact same techniques and methods and colors. After about 50 or 60 hours or so, the whole model was painted and I put it together and I put it on the base. I already have a video showing you how I did the base and the idea with the barrel filled with toxic waste falling over. Originally, the idea with the barrel was that the Deff Dread was just barging through a factory hall and just pushing away everything in his path, including this barrel, so that it spilled out with this toxic waste. However, once I put the Deff Dread together, I thought he looked a bit clumsy. There's just so much going on, and he's got like these 4 arms, and I mean, it's a Deff Dread. It doesn't look smart to me. So I figured that perhaps he wasn't as much doing it on purpose or because he didn't care, but because he's just a bit clumsy. I imagine he was walking through the factory looking for stuff to loot or people to tear apart with his claws or saws on his forearms, and then he just suddenly almost tripped over this barrel filled with toxic waste, and he's like, Whoopsie-Deffie. That's the background for his name. I like to have names for my models because I think it makes them much more personal and more fun to use when you're playing with them. So thank you so much for watching this video. I will see you next time. Bye.